God, and welcome to Wake Up with First Service. I am your host, Minister Morrisa. When Hezekiah became king, one of the first things he did was to set his sights on a course to reestablish the nation of Israel's relationship with the Lord. And what he was doing was something different than what many kings before him did. Because these kings that came before Hezekiah, all they did, they destroyed Israel as a nation. They destroyed worship. They destroyed the way they praised and worshiped God. And his father, King Ahaz, was one of those people, one of those kings who took part in the destruction of Israel's history, of Israel, the way they praised and worshiped God. Now, as Hezekiah witnessed the Assyrian invasion of Israel, he prepared for a possible invasion of his kingdom, which was the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, in his prep work, he prepared his army, he rebuilt the wall, he added towers, he even stopped the waters in the fountains of Gihon from flowing. So we see that as a king, Hezekiah did what it took to protect his people. And we'll see as we continue to examine this story just how much preparation and how much it took Hezekiah and the people to prepare for this possible invasion. But what we'll examine this morning is how the most important thing that he and his people could do to prepare for war was to put their trust in the Lord. So this morning we will be in the 32nd chapter of 2nd Chronicles, and our lesson's entitled Hezekiah Rallies Judah's Army. We'll be going from verses 1 through 8, and then we'll close out verses 22 and 23. So let's start our lesson. Let's start off in verse 1. And we'll see in this first section of Scripture, verses 1 through 5, we'll see how Hezekiah prepares for war. And one of the things he's preparing for prior to war is the siege that the Assyrian army is going to lay. So in verse 1, we're going to see how the Assyrians start this declaration of war by laying siege to the city where the people are, where King Hezekiah is. And this is the beginning of this war between Judah and the Assyrian army. So let's look at verse 1, 32nd chapter, and let's see how this siege comes to pass. Verse 1. After these things, and the establishment thereof, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered into Judah and encamped against the fenced cities and thought to win them for himself. So one of the first things we see as we start our lesson, we see the grace and mercy of God, of the Lord, and how this grace and mercy allowed King Hezekiah to complete some of the religious reforms that he wanted to do, to complete some of the things that he had in his plan to get the people of Judah back on track with the Lord. So the Lord, in his infinite grace and mercy, allowed him to put these things into place, and allowing him to put these reforms in place for the benefit of the people. This was so that his strength would be revealed in reforming of his people. So God allowed Hezekiah to put reforms in place to get them back on the track of righteousness, to get them back on the track and being in God's good grace. See, when it comes to the Assyrian people, they were the most powerful people in the land. They were the most abundant people in the land, and they were the most feared in the Middle East under the king Sennacherib. So we see that while one people and one army is getting ready to destroy, King Hezekiah is trying to rebuild the people. He's trying to uplift the people. He's trying to get the people out of this mindset that the old kings had put them in. And that was to worship idols. That was to not praise and worship God. It was to live a life where they couldn't get a prayer through, where King Hezekiah had to be put in place by the Lord. So now, in Hezekiah's 14th year as king, the Assyrians, led by their new king, had come to invade Judah. Now, Judah is the southern kingdom of Israel. We know the northern kingdom of Israel is called Israel with a different king. So we see that the Assyrians, having already taken Israel and its king and put them under siege and put them under their thumb, now they're moving on to the southern kingdom of Judah. So Hezekiah has a plan. First thing is to reform the people, and second thing is to build up the defenses against this invading army. And we'll see one of the first things Hezekiah does in his wisdom is he seeks counsel. And this is something we all should learn from. We all don't know everything. And it's always wise and it's always in our best interest to always seek counsel, to get another person's opinion, to bounce ideas off another individual or another group of individuals, because it's good to get feedback on what we need to do. And Hezekiah is no different. He's going to go and seek counsel to make sure that the decisions that he makes are good for him, are good for the people, and is praising and giving God his glory. So let's look at verse 2 and 3. In 2 and 3, Hezekiah does what we all should do in times of distress, in times of need, and that is to seek counsel. So let's go down to verses 2 and 3. Verse 2. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was come, and that he was purposed to fight against Jerusalem, he took counsel with his princes and his mighty men to stop the waters of the fountains which were without the city, and they did help him. So as soon as Hezekiah received word that the Assyrians had started to invade the fenced cities, started to invade the fortified cities, the first thing he did was to go seek counsel. And he already knew without a doubt that they were coming for a fight and they were coming for war. So what Hezekiah is doing, he's going to seek counsel among his princes, among those who has put in position to help him in a time of need, to be an encouragement, to lend a listening ear, to give him knowledge, to point him in the right direction. So the first thing he does, he goes to the princes and they come up with the idea, we need to cut off the water supply. And that's the first thing that he does. He stops the water supply to the city, which means that any invading army, any invading people, when they come to this town, when they come to this area, they might want to come and fight, but there is no water. No water for the people, no water for their king, no water for their horses. So we see that Hezekiah is doing what the invading army should be doing, and that is cutting off supplies to the city. And this is one way that Hezekiah is trying to deter the Assyrians from laying siege. Now in verse 3, we also see that this knowledge that Hezekiah has to begin preparing the city of Jerusalem for the siege by the Assyrians, it's wise to do these things. It's wise to prepare for something. Even if it does not happen, it's good to be prepared. We hope for the best and we prepare for the worst. And in preparation, we are preparing to succeed. We are preparing to move forward. We are not preparing to fail. So Hezekiah is preparing to win this war if it happens. He's prepared to save his people if this invading army comes to Jerusalem. Now the question is, what was the first plan of defense? What was one of the first things that he did? The first thing that Hezekiah did, he consulted with leadership and his military advisors. Now we know that this is going to be a possible war with Jerusalem and a war with the Assyrian army where they're going to lay siege to the city. So now this goes from being a political thing to a military thing. And he goes to his military leaders because that's why they are in place, to take care of these things, to counsel him, to inform him what's the best way to defend the city. The second thing he did is they came up with a plan to stop the water supply outside of Jerusalem. So if we stop the water supply, they don't have no water for their horses, they don't have no water for their men, and we know that the Assyrians without water, or better yet, anybody without water becomes weak. And the thing is, we cannot beat the natural way things work. As far as the human body can only go 3 days without water. So if Hezekiah shuts off the water supply to the outside cities, but keeps the water supply in his city, where he's holding up camp, then he can outlast the Assyrian army because their bodies without water is not going to work very well. So we see that Hezekiah has a very sound plan in how to defend his city. And it only came to pass because he used wisdom and knowledge and seek counsel. So now he sought the counsel of his princes, he sought the counsel of his military advisors, They gave him good counsel. They gave him some good ideas. So now what does he do with these ideas? He puts them into motion. And this is nothing more than preparing the defense for the coming army. So let's look at verses 4 and 5 and see how Hezekiah and the people are preparing for this invasion. Verse 4. So there was gathered much people together, who stopped all the fountains and the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water? Also, he strengthened himself and built up all the wall that was broken and raised it up to the towers, and another wall without, and repaired Milo in the city of David, and made darts and shields in abundance. So we see Hezekiah and the people, they are busy. They're not sitting back, they're not losing their mind. They are busy doing what needs to be done, and that is to prepare for war. So now that they had a plan, they now needed the manpower to put this plan in motion. So what do? They organized, and they organized a large crew of people who blocked the springs. They cut off the brook that ran through the land, which was the middle of Judah. So now Judah, with this brook that's running through the middle of their city, they stopped the water. They stopped the water. That shows you how important it is to prepare. So how would Judah get water if Hezekiah ordered all the water shut off? Well, again, preparation. Hezekiah had two working crews to dig a tunnel, one coming from Jerusalem to where Judah was, and the other tunnel was going from where Judah was to Jerusalem, which means the working crews would meet in the middle. And what they did was they dug this tunnel from the Gihon Springs to the city, and it's called a Siloam tunnel. So while the water is shut off on the outside of the city, while the fountains are off, while the brook is cut off, underneath where they are is a tunnel bringing fresh water to the king, to his people, as well as to his army. So we see, why is it so important to prepare in good times for times that might be bad? So Hezekiah so far has it all worked out. He's going to build up the walls, he's going to have the towers, he's going to shut off the water so only his people and his army has fresh water to drink. Now this is a great plan, but again, a plan without God is just not going to work. So we see that even in his preparation, Hezekiah knows that he has to keep God in his plan. And we see in verse 5, now with the water supply cut off and secured, Hezekiah strengthened his defenses. What did he do? The broken walls, he built them up. And then on top of these walls, in between these walls, he put towers where men could be there with their bow and arrows, where there can be lookouts. So he put towers on the walls. Another thing he did was he added a wall outside of the existing wall. So now, instead of the Assyrian army have to come through one wall, Hezekiah has now put another wall in place. So we see that Hezekiah is really taking this threat very seriously. And finally, he repaired the ancient fortifications. It was called the mound. And this was ancient. It was called ancient because it was built way before the time that David took over the city of Jerusalem. So not only did he add stuff to his defenses, he already used the things that was already there. So we see that Hezekiah is leaving no stone unturned. He's using everything to his advantage to win this war. And he also made large amounts of weapons and shields, because a soldier without a weapon, a soldier without a shield is not going to do too much damage. So Hezekiah has now finally fortified the city. He has finally got his men together. He got them weapons. He got them shields. They cut off the water. Now Hezekiah is ready for war. Now here's the thing. God will provide, but so must we. Otherwise, we're guilty of tempting the Lord. And what I mean is that when Hezekiah got the word that Assyria was invading, he could have just told the people, we'll pray to the Lord and we'll leave it alone. But what did Hezekiah do? I know the Lord is on my side. I know the Lord is going to protect us. But what must I do? What must the people do to work along with the Lord? See, God will provide a way. God will go before us. God will carry us. But we must at first stand up on our own 2 feet and want to take care of ourselves. So Hezekiah did not lay back and said, well, the Lord will take care of all things. No, he as a king, he as a man of God stood on his own 2 feet and tried to help himself. And thus the Lord blessed him to be able to make shields, to be able to cut off the water, to be able to build these walls and these defenses, because Hezekiah was taking part in his own rescue. He was taking part in his own defense. And in doing that, he showed the Lord that he needed him just that much. So a lesson that we can take for Hezekiah thus far is that, yes, it's great. We should pray to God. We should put our supplications before the Lord to help us out in a time of need, to help us out in trouble. But that does not mean that we don't try to help ourselves, that we don't try to stand upon our 2 feet until the Lord comes through. Try to make a way, try to get an understanding, try to get to that next goal until the Lord comes through. And this is what Hezekiah is doing. We're going to fight, we're going to defend, we're going to do what we need to do, because we know in due time the Lord will come through. So now, he's built up the defenses, got the water shut off, all these things are squared away, but there's one last thing he has to do, and that's to give his men a pep talk. Because everybody, at some point in time in their life, they're going to need a pep talk. They're going to need encouragement. They're going to need a pat on the back. They're going to need a word to keep them going, to get them going, and show them that there is a way, and God's going to make a way. So this is what Hezekiah is going to do in verses 6 and 8, is to encourage the men not to be scared, not to be afraid, because this is such a great and wonderful and big army, and they destroyed Israel, and they did all. No, we need to stay encouraged through tough times. We need to stay encouraged through times of trial and tribulation. That's the only way that we're going to make it through. So let's look at this pep talk that Hezekiah is going to give his men, give his army, to encourage them to stay on the battlefield for the Lord. Verse 6. And he set captains of war over the people and gathered them together to him in the street of the gate of the city, and spake comfortably to them, saying, Be strong and courageous. Be not afraid nor dismayed for the king of Assyria, nor for all the multitude that is with him. For there be more with us than with him. Verse 8. With him is an army of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God, to help us and to fight our battles. And the people rested themselves upon the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. So the first thing we could see is Hezekiah is being a king. He's taking the lead. He's encouraging his people. But not only that, he also appointed captains to be in charge, for he knew an army needed officers to run efficiently. He's not going to try to run and do everything himself. He has appointed people to do these certain things. He also assembled in an open place near the gates of Jerusalem, and gave his men words of encouragement to prepare them for what was about to come. So here we see that Hezekiah, he brings his men out to an open place, and he starts encouraging them. He encouraged his men with the same words that God spoke to encourage Joshua. Be strong, be courageous, be upright, knowing that the victory is yours. All you have to do is stand with the Lord. Now, he reassured them that to not fear, not to be discouraged by the Assyrian army, for there will be more with us than with them. And that means that in spite of the Assyrians' army size, in spite of the king that was over the Assyrian army, it did not matter, because Hezekiah had faith in the Lord. That's what he was trying to get over to his men. And Hezekiah, he walked by faith and not by sight. Thus, he saw his army as a greater army. He saw his people as a greater people than the Assyrians that were coming. See, the Assyrians basically were just an army of men. They had no faith. They had no belief. They had no God backing them. But Hezekiah knew that if he stayed faithful to the Lord, if his people continued to lean on the Lord, that God would give them a victory. So what was Hezekiah basically saying was that the one who was with Judah was greater than the Assyrian army. And that one who was with Judah, the one who has blessed Judah, the one who has given Judah these words of encouragement, was God himself. God was with Judah. God was going to protect Judah. God was going to go before Judah and give them the victory. Now, Hezekiah continued by stating that all the king of Assyria had was an army made up of flesh, made up of men, made up of people who were no greater than the man next to him. But he knew that all the might that he had, all the fighting power that he had, all the encouragement that was coming his way, all that he had done to build up the defenses, to cut off the water, to get the people ready, all that came from the Lord. And Judah now had the strength of the Almighty God on their side to help them win, to help them sustain, and to help them come out victorious. See, his faith kept him believing that not only would God help them fight, but he would also fight for them. Thus, the people took courage in his words, which means that because Hezekiah believed on God and they saw him, he wholeheartedly believed, the people believed. See, that's the type of king, that's the type of leader we need. We can't have a leader tell us to believe and then they don't believe. We can't have a boss tell us to do a job and they don't even know how to do the job. See, it starts with the person. We are the example. If people see us standing on faith through times of trial and tribulation, keeping our head up, keep moving forward, that encourages other people. But if people look to you and I and we're down, people look to you and I and we're crying, we're all beat up, we don't know which way to go, that does not encourage the people. It does the exact opposite. It discourages the people because we don't know who's looking to us for strength. We don't know who's looking to us for courage, looking to us for understanding. But if we don't first believe, how in the world can we encourage others to believe? If we don't think we're going to make it, how can we encourage somebody else that they can make it? So it starts with us. We have to believe, and those who look to us will then be encouraged and believe also. Now, our lesson jumps. We jump past verses 9 through 21, and we go directly to verses 22 and 23. But what happened in these verses that's not contained in our lesson? Well, the king of Assyria, he engaged in what's called propaganda, which is nothing more than biased or misleading information. And what he did was, before he shot an arrow, before he pulled out a sword, he started this war with propaganda. All wars start with propaganda. Things that you read in the paper, you hear on the news, you hear on the radio, little sound bites that we hear. Any war starts first with propaganda. And this king of Assyria is no different. So what did he do? The first thing he did was he told the people to just surrender and not even fight. This is propaganda. Why put up a fight when you know you're going to lose? Why put up a fight when you know no one's going to help you? This is the propaganda that the Assyrian king was using. The second thing he did, he sent messages to the people. And these messages were to discourage the people, to knock the wind out of their sails. They're encouraged, they're ready to fight, they're ready to go to war, and he's sending this propaganda to do the exact opposite. So what was in these messages he sent? One was, do you think you can survive my siege? Then he says, King Hezekiah is trying to kill you. He's trying to let you die. And then he sends messages saying, you know what? Assyria has never lost a siege. We've never lost a war. We've always conquered those we've set our sights on. See, this is all propaganda because this stuff is not promised. These are things that the king of Assyria, because of what he's already done, he's assuming that he will do again. But the one difference in this siege that probably is different from many of the other sieges that he's laid is that God is with the people of Judah, and God is going to protect the people of Judah. He also sent letters scorning the God of Israel. He shouted threats to the people in their Jewish language outside of the wall. So we see that this king of Assyria, he's not letting anything go, so much so that he had men stationed on the outside of wall, speaking the language of the people, the Jewish language, and just shouting threats over the wall within earshot so the people can hear it. Now, this is no different. Again, all wars start with propaganda. And we see that this propaganda that the king of Assyria is using is no different than the propaganda the Nazis used in World War II. In World War II, the Nazis dropped leaflets over the soldiers, over the American soldiers, mainly targeting the black soldiers, telling them that this is not their war. This is not your fight. Matter of fact, there's never been a lynching in Germany. There's never been a lynching of colored men in Germany, so why are you fighting us? And if you give up right now, our POWs, they eat well, they sleep well, they got a nice place to sleep. So what the Nazis were doing in World War II is the same thing the king of Assyria is doing, and that is starting the war first with the fight of propaganda. Because if I can get you to fail to believe in yourself, if I can get you to doubt yourself, if I can get you to think that you can't make it, that you can't do it, that you can't succeed, then the war is already won. Then we have already lost if we let somebody take us out of the mindset that we can, take us out the mindset that we will. See, this is what God does. He's an encouraging God. He builds us up. He encourages us. He tells us that we can do all things as long as it is in the will of the Lord. But what does Satan do? He comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Any plans that you and I have to move forward, any plans that you and I have to be successful, Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy it. And this is what the king of Assyria is trying to do. Steal, kill, and destroy not only the people of Judah, but their faith in their God. So what was the result of all this propaganda? Telling them they can't make it, telling them they can't do it. Why are you even trying to fight? You do know we've never lost a war. We never lost a city. We never lost a city that we tried to conquer. What was the result in all this negative propaganda? Well, the first thing it did, it caused Hezekiah and Isaiah to cry out to the Lord in prayer. So we see the first thing that happens because of all this negativity, it encourages Hezekiah and Isaiah to be more positive and turn to the Lord. And that's how we have to be. When people are speaking negative things to us, towards us, about us, we should not let it tear us down. We shouldn't let it depress us, oppress us, or suppress us from keep moving forward. We got to be like Hezekiah and Isaiah. When people are speaking negativity towards us in our life, or you're not going to make it, or you can't do it, or you won't do it, we need to do what they did and to cry out unto the Lord, to make a way out of no way, to bless me to prove them wrong, to bless me to take another step, to keep moving forward. He also, it caused the angel of the Lord to completely destroy the Assyrian army. See, it was okay when you was talking about the people, when you was asking them, do you think you're going to survive? And your king is only allowing you to die. But when they started talking about God, shouting negativity towards the Lord, doubting that God can save them, doubting God can keep them, now we are talking about blaspheming against the Lord. Not just his people, but the God that's over these people. So now the angel of the Lord came and completely destroyed the Assyrian army. This caused the king of Assyria to return home in both shame and disgrace. He also, the king also went to the temple of his God, not the one true God, but he went to the temple of his God after losing this battle with his head down low in shame and disgrace. And when he goes into the temple of his God, he is killed by his own sons. So we see that the people of Judah didn't raise a shield. They didn't pick up a bow and arrow. They didn't even handle a sword. Why? Because the God of Israel was with them. And he struck down the Assyrian army. They didn't have to fight. They didn't have to battle. They didn't have to run. God took care of their problems. But that's because they leaned on God solely. They looked to God for understanding and not their own. They wanted to be a people of peace, but this people of war was coming against them. And instead of trying to fight it themselves, instead of trying to outlast this army, they turned it over to the Lord. King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah together cried out to the Lord for help. And God did what only God can do, and that's answer on time. So let's close our lesson, these last two verses, and we see that God gave them a divine victory because they praised him, because they worshiped him, because they prepared. Even though they knew God was with them, they still prepared doing their part. And in verse 22, we're going to see how the Lord Not the army of Judah, but the Lord defeats the Assyrians. So let's look at verse 22. Verse 22. Thus the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and from the hand of all others, and guided them on every side. So now that God has delivered them from the Assyrian army, he also delivered them from other people. Because this war, this victory, is now being talked about throughout the land. And now that God has established that these are my people, and anybody comes against them is now coming against me. So the Lord has blessed them to be victorious, but also blessed them so that no other people in the surrounding areas would even think about attacking them, because they know that in attacking Judah, attacking their king, and in attacking these people, we are in reality attacking the Lord. And verse 23 in closing, and many brought gifts unto the Lord to Jerusalem and presents to Hezekiah, king of Judah, so that he was magnified in the sight of all nations henceforth. So we see that because of what God did, Hezekiah and the people, they get the victory. Hezekiah, he has a reputation now of being a godly king and a good king, a king who can get a prayer through, a king who God fights on his side, a king that takes care of his people by turning the people and turning them over to God and letting God protect them, letting God rule them. See, Hezekiah was just a king on paper, but the real King of Kings and the real Lord of Lords was the Lord God who had taken care of them, not just the king of Judah. So after witnessing the great power of the Lord, the great power of this army, we see that God now has established this hedge of protection around his king and around his people. Now, even though Hezekiah did not know just how God would provide a victory, how God would be for them, how God would go before them, he still believed that he would. He still believed. Even though he didn't see it, he still believed, Lord, the God of his people and the God of his faith was still going to make a victory. See, Hezekiah and the people in faith did their part, and the Lord faithfully did his. And that's what we got. That's the lesson. That's the lesson in a nutshell. We do our part. Do what we can do. Go as far as we can go. And once we reach that point, reach that limit, reach that line, then we turn it over to the Lord, thanking him and praising him for getting us this far. So what have we seen in our lesson this morning? Well, we've seen how good leaders encourage those they lead. That's what good leaders do. Good leaders make more leaders. Good leaders don't make more followers. That's the whole thing. Good leaders encourage those who they lead. One of the things the Honorable Chief Bishop used to say is, if you think you're a good leader, turn around and see how many people are following you. That dictates how good your leadership is. The second thing we've seen is that strong faith in God enables us to face difficult circumstances. If we rest on our own understanding, rest on our power, rest on our own money, we will get depressed and we will get down, because we might not have enough money to solve this problem. We might not have enough strength. We might not have enough intellect to get ourselves out these issues, these trials, and these tribulations. But if we are wise and if we are smart, we know to turn all things over to the Lord. That's what Hezekiah did. That's what the prophet Isaiah did. And that's what the people did. And thus, they got the victory. When these armies, these trials and tribulations come, turn it over to the Lord. We also seen how propaganda is a strong tool of the enemy. Before any war starts, before there's any button of heads, any interaction on any level, whether it's a group of people or one-on-one, there's always negative press, there's always propaganda. Somebody lying on you, somebody talking about you, somebody spreading untruths about you. That happens before the interaction, before the button of heads. There's always propaganda first. So if we are wise, and if we're listening, once we hear this propaganda, we know that we're going up against the enemy. And any enemy that comes against us, if we stay faithful, if we stay true, if we stay obedient, it's not only coming against us, they're coming against God. So what have we learned? That those who try to live a right life, you got to expect some opposition. If you're trying to live right, the devil is trying to get you wrong. If you're trying to be right, the devil is trying to make you and I be wrong. So if we're trying to walk this path of righteousness in faith, being obedient, we got to expect opposition. because it tests our faith, it tests our obedience, and it makes us a better person and a better saint of God. We also learned that a wise person seeks counsel before making a decision, not after. You seek counsel before making the decision, the chances of making a mistake are greatly decreased. But if we seek counsel after we make a bad decision, it just does not work. So let's seek counsel before any decision. And in seeking counsel, basically, let's pray about it before any decision, great or small. Nothing is too big for God. Nothing is too hard for God. Nothing is too small for God. So before any decision that you and I make, let's always take it before the Lord. And finally, if we are humble in all we do, God will honor us before the world. So if we are humble before God, thanking him, praising him, worshiping him, giving him all the credit that's due for everything that's in our life, everything he's brought in our life, everything he's taken out of our life, then he will honor us before the world. We see Hezekiah put God first, prepared the people, praised God with another prophet, cried out unto the Lord. He did all this in humility and meekness. And because of his humility and because of his meekness, he gained the victory. But also, God honored him before the world. People came and brought him tributes. They brought him gifts. He had the respect of the people of the land. All because of what? Not because he won a war, not because he had the bigger army, but because he gave God his honor, his praise, and his glory that was due unto him. So let us honor God in all things. Let us thank God in all things. And let us be respectful and obedient to God in all things. And if we do, God will honor you and I before the world. So I hope you have enjoyed our lesson this morning. That's all the time we have. But I encourage you to tune in to the 11 o'clock hour for 11 o'clock service, where we are in the house of God that is called by his name. So I encourage you to tune in, and I encourage you to come on in to get a good word from our leaders of the gospel. And let's always keep our leaders of the gospel lifted up in prayer. We are continually to pray for our first service superintendent, Evangelist Morgan. So let's keep them prayers coming in. Let's keep that positive energy coming in. Let's keep them supplications coming up to the Lord on her behalf. So as always, I thank you for tuning in. I thank you for spending your morning. We'll wake up with first service. And as always, be safe, be encouraged, be blessed. Until we meet again.